As whispers began to circulate, they were easy to dismiss. Dr. Shipman was efficient, some said. Perhaps too efficient, but efficiency isn't a crime. And in a town where everyone knew everyone, accusing the local doctor felt unthinkable. He had delivered babies, comforted the dying, and sat at countless kitchen tables offering reassurance. Who would dare point a finger at him? Behind closed doors, however, Shipman lived a carefully controlled life. He kept meticulous records that looked legitimate on the surface, but told a different story to those who knew where to look. Dosages altered, timelines adjusted, symptoms added after the fact. Each death, on its own, seemed unremarkable. Together, they formed a pattern no one wanted to see. And there was something else: control. Shipman didn't just want his patients to trust him, he needed it. He decided when pain ended, when life stopped. With a syringe of diamorphine, he played judge and executioner, often leaving bodies positioned neatly in chairs or beds, as though death had arrived gently on its own, peaceful, natural. But evil has a way of overreaching. The more confident he became, the sloppier the details grew. A signature that didn't match a medical explanation that made no sense. A family member who asked one question to many. Slowly, painfully, the facade began to crack, and when investigators finally started pulling at the thread, they discovered something horrifying. This wasn't a few tragic mistakes. This was a method, a routine, a doctor who had been killing quietly, calmly, and with absolute impunity for nearly 3 decades. Hyde would never be the same again. Neither would the country that had trusted him. To understand how Shipman got away with it, you first have to understand who he was. Harold Frederick Shipman was born in 1946, a bright, ambitious boy from a working-class family. By all accounts, he was intelligent, driven, and desperate to prove himself. But his life and arguably his future crimes were shaped by one defining trauma: his mother's death. She died of lung cancer when Shipman was just a teenager. Harold watched her deteriorate, watched the pain consume her. And he watched something else, to the power of the doctor. He saw how a simple injection of morphine could make suffering disappear. To a young, impressionable mind, that moment fused medicine with control, relief delivered at the push of a needle. Years later, Shipman would use that same drug diamorphine not to ease pain, but to end lives. By the early 1970s, he had achieved his goal. He was a general practitioner, respected and trusted. But the cracks appeared almost immediately. In 1975, Shipman was caught forging prescriptions for pethidine, a powerful opioid, to fuel his own addiction. It should have been career-ending. It should have raised serious questions about his judgment, his ethics, and his access to controlled drugs. Instead, he was fined. He was sent to rehab. And then, he was quietly allowed to return to medicine. This is the question that haunts the entire case. Why was he allowed to keep practicing? No permanent mark on his record, no strict monitoring, no real oversight. The system treated it as a lapse, not a warning. And that failure would cost hundreds of lives. In 1977, Shipman moved to the quiet town of Hyde and opened a new practice. A fresh start, new patients, a clean slate. To the community, he was just another GP, polite, professional, dependable. To the system, he was no longer a problem worth watching. That's when the deaths began to climb. At first, it was subtle, a patient here, another there. Mostly elderly, mostly at home, the kind of deaths no one questions. But over time, Hyde's mortality rate quietly outpaced surrounding towns. More people were dying under Shipman's care than anywhere else, and no one noticed. Or worse, no one looked closely enough. Because Shipman wasn't just killing people. He was exploiting trust, exploiting paperwork, exploiting a system that assumed doctors could not be predators. And in Hyde, behind the reassuring voice and the black medical bag, Dr. Harold Shipman was just getting started. Shipman's MO was terrifyingly simple, and that was precisely why it worked. He targeted the elderly, mostly women who lived alone. They were patients who trusted him completely, people who saw him not as a threat, but as a reassuring constant in their final years. To them, Dr. Harold Shipman wasn't just a physician. He was a familiar face, a calm voice, a man who made house calls when others wouldn't. He would arrive for what appeared to be a routine checkup, no rush, no suspicion. He'd sit by the bedside and chat about the weather, ask about their children, comment on how tidy the house looked. All the while, he was preparing a syringe filled with diamorphine, an amount far beyond anything therapeutic, a lethal dose. The injection was quick, almost casual. Within minutes, the patient would be dead. Narrator. But here is the part that kept him safe for 27 years: the paperwork. As a doctor, Shipman had authority that few people ever questioned. He could sign death certificates, and so he did over and over again. He wrote causes that sounded natural, inevitable, unremarkable. Old age, heart failure, phrases so common they barely registered. Then came the final, calculated suggestion. He would gently advise grieving families that cremation was best. It was simpler, he'd say more dignified, less distressing. And with that single choice, the evidence vanished forever. If a family member hesitated, if someone said, "But doctor, she was fine an hour ago," Shipman never faltered. He would look them straight in the eye, his expression calm, sympathetic, practiced. He'd lower his voice and say, "Her heart just gave out. It was peaceful, she didn't suffer." And that was enough. Because who doubts a doctor? Who questions the man who signed the certificate, offered comfort, and spoke with such quiet certainty? For decades, no one did. For decades, Shipman was invisible. He blended perfectly into the background of ordinary life, a trusted family doctor in a quiet English town. Patients praised him, colleagues respected him. Death followed him, but always in ways that seemed natural, expected, explainable. Then, in 1998, he made a mistake. He got arrogant. His next victim was 81-year-old Kathleen Grundy. She wasn't just another elderly patient living alone. She was a former mayor of Hyde, sharp-minded, independent, and well-known in the community. By every account, she was healthy for her age, active, alert, not someone whose death would quietly pass without questions. When Kathleen died suddenly after a visit from Shipman, the routine began as it always had: a death certificate, a medical explanation, calm reassurance. But this time, the aftermath didn't end there. Kathleen's daughter, Angela Grundy, was going through her mother's affairs when she uncovered something that made her blood run cold. Angela wasn't just a grieving daughter, she was a solicitor. And the document in front of her made no sense. Her mother's will had been changed. Instead of leaving her estate to family and charities, nearly £400,000 had been left to one person, Dr. Harold Shipman. Narrator. The will was a mess. It looked crudely assembled, as if it had been typed on an old-fashioned typewriter. The language was awkward, the formatting was wrong. And most damning of all, Kathleen Grundy would never have done this. She had never mentioned changing her will. She had no reason to reward her GP with her life savings. Angela knew something was wrong. She went straight to the police. This single decision cracked the case wide open. Investigators ordered Kathleen Grundy's body exhumed, one of the very few of Shipman's patients who had not been cremated. When toxicologists examined the remains, they found what should never have been there: morphine in lethal quantities. The doctor's explanation of natural causes collapsed instantly. When police raided Shipman's home, they found the smoking gun, literally, the typewriter. It matched the will perfectly. But that wasn't all. More damaging than the forged document was what investigators found on his computer. Shipman had kept detailed medical records for his patients. After Kathleen's death and after the deaths of many others, he had gone back and altered the notes. He tried to make them appear sicker, frailer, closer to death than they had ever been in life. What Shipman didn't understand was this: computers remember everything. Each edit carried a timestamp. Police were able to prove that these medical notes were written after the patients were already dead. The records meant to protect him instead exposed him. The quiet doctor, who had hidden in plain sight for decades, had left a trail he could no longer erase. And for the first time in 27 years, the truth was undeniable. Shipman was convicted in 2000 for 15 murders, 15 lives, proven beyond doubt. It was enough to sentence him to life in prison, multiple life sentences, with no possibility of parole. But the conviction didn't bring an ending. It opened a door. Because once investigators knew what to look for, the numbers began to climb. The government launched what became known as the Shipman Inquiry, the largest investigation of a single serial killer in British history. Case by case, death by death, Analysts re-examined decades of medical records, cremation forms, and patterns that had once seemed invisible. Narrator: what they found was staggering. The inquiry concluded that Shipman had likely killed at least 215 people, and even that number came with a warning. The true total, investigators said, could be far higher, possibly over 250 victims, more than most of Britain's notorious serial killers combined. And yet, throughout it all, Shipman said nothing. He never confessed. He never expressed remorse. He never explained why. In court, he sat silent and emotionless, refusing to offer even the smallest insight into his actions. The families were left with questions that would never be answered. Why target the elderly? Why mostly women? Why for so long? Some psychologists believe it was about control, the ultimate authority over life and death, exercised quietly, invisibly, without challenge. Others point to Shipman's past, the death of his mother from cancer, during which he watched doctors administer morphine to ease her suffering. They speculate that he was replaying that moment again and again, crossing a line most people never could. But these are only theories, because Shipman took the truth with him. In 2004, for years into his sentence, Harold Shipman was found dead in his prison cell. He had taken his own life, just days before his 58th birthday. No final statement, no explanation, no closure. For the families, the damage was permanent. Trust in doctors, once unquestioned, was shaken across the country. The system that had protected him for decades was forced to confront its failures, and the man who hid behind a white coat and a calm smile left behind nothing but numbers, unanswered questions, and one chilling reality. Some monsters don't lurk in the shadows. Some knock politely, carry a medical bag, and are welcomed inside. The legacy of Harold Shipman didn't end with his death. It forced an entire nation to confront an uncomfortable truth. British law changed because of him. Today, a single doctor can no longer sign off on a cremation without oversight. Death certification procedures were overhauled. Medical records became more tightly monitored. Safeguards were put in place, all because one man proved how devastating unchecked trust could be. Narrator: Shipman exposed a fatal flaw in the system. A system built on assumption, on respect, on the belief that a doctor would never abuse their power. And yet, he did, for decades. The doctor death case remains one of the most chilling reminders in true crime history, not because of brutality or spectacle, but because of how ordinary it all looked. No forced entry, no struggle, just a knock at the door and a familiar face. So what do you think? Was Harold Shipman the product of a broken system that gave him too much power and too little scrutiny? Or was he simply pure evil, someone who would have found a way no matter the safeguards? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. I read everyone. Narrator: and if you found this case as chilling as I did, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to True Crime Stories for more deep dives into the darkest corners of real life. We upload new cases every Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday and Sunday. UK, 16 o'clock. USA, 11 o'clock. Stay connected, stay curious, and stay with us for more stories they never want you to forget. Until next time, stay safe.